comes from a man I will call David, though that is not his real name. David had just made one of the biggest transitions of his adult life. After months of searching and saving, he had finally moved into his own place, a house in a neighborhood he didn't know particularly well. He had visited a few times before making the decision. Driven through the streets, walked around a bit, sized the place up. On those visits, it struck him how quiet everything was. Not eerily quiet, just peacefully calm. The kind of neighborhood where people keep to themselves, mind their own business, and don't cause problems. He liked that. He was that kind of person himself. What he hadn't anticipated was just how invisible everyone in that neighborhood seemed to be. When the moving truck pulled up and he spent the entire day carrying boxes in and out of the house, not a single person from any of the surrounding homes came out to introduce themselves or even acknowledge that a new neighbor had arrived. No waves from the driveway. No faces peering from windows. No friendly knocks at the door. Nothing. It was as if the houses around his were simply props. Decorations sitting on either side of the road with no life behind them. David told himself he didn't mind. He was a private person. The last thing he needed was a string of awkward introductions on an already exhausting moving day. But something about the complete absence of human contact still lodged itself in the back of his mind. He couldn't quite tell what kind of people lived around him. And without that knowledge, the neighborhood felt strangely unknowable, like a setting in a story where the author hasn't filled in all the details yet. He pushed the thought aside and focused on unpacking. The second day after moving in, David hadn't started his new job yet. He spent basically the entire day inside, surrounded by towers of cardboard boxes, trying to make sense of where everything should go. It was snowing heavily outside, the kind of thick, steady snowfall that makes you feel like the whole world has been muffled and insulated. He had no particular reason to go out, so he didn't. By evening, he was exhausted and stressed from the chaos of an unorganized new home. He went to bed early, somewhere around 8 in the evening, and fell asleep quickly. He didn't expect to wake up until morning. But at 2 in the morning, exactly 2 in the morning, his eyes opened. He lay there in the dark for a moment, groggy and confused, trying to understand what had pulled him out of sleep. He rolled over and checked the time. The red glow of the clock confirmed it, 2 a.m. He couldn't immediately figure out why he had woken up. There was no bad dream he could remember. No noise from outside, as far as he could tell. And then he heard it. A slow, heavy scraping sound. Muffled slightly by the walls and the snow outside, but unmistakable. It came in a pattern, a long, drawn-out scrape, followed by a dull thudding impact. Then a pause. Then again. Scrape. Thud. Pause. Scrape. Thud. Over and over. Methodical. Patient. Deliberate. David lay still and listened, trying to place the sound. After several seconds, he climbed out of bed and crossed the room to the window. He looked down toward the front of the house. There was a man standing in his driveway. He was shoveling snow. The man was dressed entirely in dark winter clothing, a heavy jacket, dark pants, gloves, boots. His face was obscured by the angle and the darkness. He moved back and forth across the driveway in a steady rhythm, scraping up a line of snow with the shovel and tossing it aside, then stepping back and starting again. There was nothing hurried about the way he moved. Nothing frantic. He worked with the slow, measured calm of someone who had all the time in the world and knew it. David stood at the window and watched him for 2 or 3 minutes. His first reaction was confusion more than fear. Who was this person? Why would any neighbor, someone he hadn't even met, come out in the dead of night to shovel someone else's driveway? It made no sense. It was considerate in theory, David supposed, but the timing was completely wrong. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. If you wanted to do someone a favor, you didn't do it at 2 in the morning. You waited until a reasonable hour, knocked on their door, introduced yourself first. The more David watched, the more the unease in his chest began to grow. Something about this felt deeply, instinctively wrong. He couldn't put into words exactly what it was. Just a feeling. The kind of feeling that the human body has developed over thousands of years of evolution precisely so that you don't ignore it. He decided to go downstairs and speak to the man. He left the window, went downstairs, pulled on his shoes and a jacket, and opened the front door. The driveway was empty. Not just empty, abandoned. The man was gone, but he hadn't finished the job. Half the driveway was still buried in snow. Whoever this person was, he had stopped directly in the middle of shoveling a section and simply walked away. Or rather, vanished. Because David looked up and down the street in both directions and saw no one. Every house was completely dark. Every other driveway on the street was still covered in snow, untouched. No footprints led from his property toward any of the surrounding homes. David stood outside in the freezing cold for several minutes, looking around in every direction, listening. Nothing. Just silence and snowfall in the yellow glow of the streetlights. He went back inside. He locked the door. He stood in the hallway for a while, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Eventually he told himself there was probably a simple explanation he wasn't thinking of, went upstairs, and went back to sleep. The next day, it snowed again. On and off throughout the afternoon and into the evening, another layer of white covered the neighborhood. David spent the day inside again, continuing to unpack. He half expected that the man from the previous night would show up at his door to introduce himself, maybe say something like, "Sorry I didn't stay to finish, I wasn't feeling well." But no one came. David saw no one at all. He went to bed that night around 11, later than the night before. He had his television set up now and had stayed up watching something before finally feeling tired enough to sleep. He woke up again just past 2 in the morning. The sound was already there when he opened his eyes. Scrape, thud, scrape, thud. He didn't take his time getting to the window this time. He moved quickly, almost urgently, and looked down into the driveway. Same man, same dark clothing, same slow, steady shoveling. Like a recording being played back on a loop. David didn't stay at the window. He turned and went straight downstairs, moving fast, pulling on his coat and boots and opening the door in one continuous motion. The driveway was empty again. The man was gone, and once again, the job was only half done. And once again, there was no one on the street, no movement anywhere, no sign of where the figure had gone. David stood outside in the cold for a long time that night. 15 minutes, maybe longer. The cold bit at his hands and face. He kept his eyes on the street, turning slowly in every direction, watching for any shape or shadow that moved. Nothing. The whole neighborhood was silent and still as a photograph. He went inside. He barely slept. This pattern continued for 6 days. Every single night, David would be pulled from sleep by that same rhythmic scraping sound. He would get up and go to the window, and the man would be there, shoveling the driveway with that same unhurried, almost mechanical patience. Every night, when David tried to go downstairs and confront him, the man was gone before he could get outside. And every time, the driveway was left unfinished. After the third or fourth night, David stopped going outside. He could see no point in it. The man always knew, somehow, to disappear before David could reach him. It was as if the moment David stepped away from the window, it triggered something, like a sensor going off, alerting the figure below that it was time to leave. David didn't know what to do. He thought about calling the police, but what would he say? "Someone keeps coming to my property at night and shoveling my driveway." He could already imagine the confused silence on the other end of the line. Even he had to admit, in the cold logic of daylight, that it sounded less like a crime and more like a very strange act of unsolicited charity. But the feeling never went away. That deep, crawling sense that something was badly wrong. That the man's behavior wasn't kindness. That the way he moved, slowly, carefully, never looking up, never reacting to David at the window, wasn't normal. That his timing wasn't coincidence. On the 6th night, David was woken by the sound again. He got out of bed and walked toward the window. And then, before he even reached it, the sound stopped. Just like that, mid-scrape, silence. David got to the window and looked down. Nobody there. But here is the thing. Here is the part that David came back to over and over again in the days and weeks and months that followed. The part he could never find an explanation for. There had been less than 1 second between the moment the sound stopped and the moment he reached the window. The man could not have run anywhere in that time. He could not have made it around the corner, or behind a hedge, or to the next house. He simply could not have physically moved far enough to disappear from view. David stared down at the driveway. It was fully shoveled. The entire thing, clean and clear. Unlike all the other nights when the man had left the job half done, tonight, the night he disappeared before David got to the window, the driveway was completely finished. David stood there at the glass for a long time, staring at the empty driveway. The air outside was still. The street was dark and quiet. And yet somewhere down there, David was absolutely certain the man was still present. Still watching. He thought about going back to bed. He thought about calling someone. He thought about a lot of things. Instead, he threw on his coat and boots and went downstairs. He reached the front door, took a breath, and swung it open hard. The man was standing on his porch, 1 foot away from David. David stumbled backward, his entire body locked up. The man was tall, taller than he had appeared from the window, and he stood completely still, the shovel held at his side, close against his body. He had a thick, scraggly beard and shoulder-length black hair that was wet with melting snow. His eyes were fixed directly on David's face with an intensity that made the air feel like it had gotten thicker. He looked sick. He looked like someone who had not slept in days. His skin was pale and drawn, and his eyes had that heavy, sunken quality that comes from deep exhaustion or something worse. But he was completely present, completely alert. His gaze did not waver for even a fraction of a second. David could not move. He could not speak. He could not even fully process what he was seeing. His brain kept snagging on the impossibility of it. The man had been gone when he looked out the window less than a minute ago. He had not seen him on the porch. He had not heard him climb the porch steps. The man did not move either. He did not speak. He did not smile or nod or make any gesture of greeting. He simply stood there and stared, from 1 foot away, as if he were looking through David rather than at him. Several seconds passed that felt much longer than several seconds. Finally, David's voice came back to him. Shaking and thin, he asked the man what he was doing. The man's eyes shifted very slightly. Something changed in them, a tightening, a deepening. His jaw moved, but no words came out. Then, without any warning or explanation, he turned, walked down the porch steps, crossed the driveway, stepped onto the road, and kept walking. He did not look back. David stood in the doorway and watched until the figure disappeared into the darkness down the street. He never came back. David spent the rest of that night sitting in his kitchen with every light on. He thought about calling the police. He thought about calling a friend. He thought about every possible explanation for everything that had happened over the past 6 nights, and none of them were satisfying. Some friends he spoke to afterward suggested the man might have been a sleepwalker, pointing to the robotic, repetitive nature of his behavior, the consistency of the timing, the almost unconscious way he carried out the same task night after night. It was a theory. David acknowledged it as a theory. But it did not explain how the man knew, every single night without fail, the exact moment that David left the window and started coming downstairs. A sleepwalker does not possess that kind of awareness. David moved out of that house a few months later. He never found out who the man was. He never got an explanation. He has no idea what the man wanted, what he was thinking, what any of it meant. And that uncertainty, that complete and total absence of answers, is the thing he says he still cannot shake, even now. Because the hardest thing about a mystery is not that it happened. It is that it may be. You carry it with you, year after year, turning it over and over in your mind, looking for the angle you missed, the detail that would finally make everything make sense. And sometimes, that angle does not exist. Sometimes things just happen, and you live with them. And some nights, you wake up at 2 in the morning for no reason at all, and you lie very still and listen, and hope that the silence outside is exactly what it seems.